The marble dining table in their Aspen mansion felt colder than the snow swirling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat there in my navy cashmere cardigan, hands folded in my lap, while my daughter Sophia and her husband Marcus stared at me like I was already a ghost. Marcus slid a thick stack of papers across the glossy surface. The top sheet read, "Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator due to mental incompetence." His Mont Blanc pen followed right behind it, placed exactly beside my name line. "Sign it, Eleanor," he said, voice smooth as the $40,000 table beneath us. "It's for your own protection. We already spoke to Dr. Harlan. He agrees you're showing signs of confusion, memory lapses, poor judgment." Sophia leaned forward, her freshly Botoxed forehead somehow still managing to wrinkle with fake concern. "Mum, we love you. That's why we moved you into the guest house. But the trust, $28 million can't just sit there while you forget things. We need to consolidate everything. For the family." I looked at the petition. Pages and pages of carefully typed lies. They had listed incidents I never remembered because they had never happened. A $700 monthly allowance starting next week. Immediate eviction notice from the guest house, effective in 30 days. And right at the bottom, the clause that would hand them full control of the Voss family trust. My late husband, David, had set it up with ironclad language. I was the sole trustee until I chose otherwise. They knew that. They just thought I was too old, too quiet, too grateful to fight. I picked up the pen. Their eyes lit up. Marcus actually smiled, that small, victorious twitch at the corner of his mouth. Then I set the pen down. Instead, I reached into the leather folder beside me and pulled out a plain black envelope. No label, no stamp, just thick paper that felt expensive even in dim light. I slid it across the table the same way Marcus had slid the petition. "Before you celebrate," I said, voice low and perfectly steady, "you should read this first." Sophia laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Mum, this isn't the time for games." Marcus snatched the envelope anyway. He tore it open with one impatient finger. Inside was a single sheet. A bank statement. One line highlighted in yellow. Transfer rejected. $4,200,000 attempted withdrawal from Voss Family Trust account number 47892-alpha. Blocked per trustee instructions dated 18 months ago. His face didn't change at first. Then the colour drained slowly, like someone had pulled a plug. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. I leaned back in the chair. The snow outside kept falling, silent and relentless. "That," I said, "is the first page of the file I've been keeping on both of you for the last 3 years. You wanted control of my money. I wanted to see exactly how much you would steal before I stopped you." Sophia's hand flew to her chest. "Mum, you're not making sense. You're confused. That's why we—" "Save it," I cut in, still calm. "The doctor you paid to write that report. He sent me a copy last week, along with the $25,000 wire you sent him from Marcus's personal account. Nice try." Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped against the heated floor. "This is ridiculous. You're clearly not competent if you're fabricating." I raised one finger. Just one. He stopped mid-sentence. "I haven't raised my voice in 40 years, Marcus. I'm not starting tonight. But I have raised something else. My standards. And right now, they do not include signing away $28 million to people who think $700 a month is generous for the woman who paid for your entire lifestyle." I stood slowly. My knees didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I had practiced this moment in the mirror every single night for months. "You have 30 days before the real papers arrive, not the ones you wrote, the ones my attorney wrote. Until then, enjoy the guest house utilities while they still work. Because tomorrow morning the accounts tied to this house change. All of them." Sophia's eyes were wide now, real fear flickering behind the designer lashes. Mum, what did you do? I picked up the black envelope and tucked it back into my folder. The motion was deliberate, precise. I did what any mother should have done years ago, I said. I stopped pretending I was blind. I walked toward the glass doors that led to the guest house wing. Snowflakes danced against the panes like tiny warnings. At the threshold I paused, just long enough to deliver the line that would keep them awake tonight. Oh, and one more thing. They both turned. The trust never belonged to you. It belonged to me the entire time. You just never noticed I was still holding the keys. I closed the door behind me without slamming it. No need. The soft click sounded louder than any shout ever could. But as I stepped into the cold hallway that connected the main house to the guest house, my heart finally allowed itself one hard beat of something that wasn't calm. Because inside that black envelope wasn't just one bank statement. It was page 1 of 147, and they had no idea what page 2 contained. I opened the door to the guest house, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. Tomorrow, the real storm would begin. But tonight, for the first time in years, I slept without setting an alarm. I already knew exactly when everything would break. The guest house was quiet the next morning. Too quiet. I made coffee in the small kitchenette using the last of the beans I had bought myself. The machine hissed softly while snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the aspen pines in perfect white silence. I sat at the tiny table by the window and opened my laptop. The screen glowed with the secure folder I had named simply Kingsley. Inside were 3 years of careful records. Every suspicious transfer, every forged signature, every arrogant text message Sophia thought I never saw. It started small. 2 years ago, I noticed the monthly statements from the trust were arriving later than usual. Then they stopped coming altogether. When I called the bank, the manager told me my daughter had requested electronic-only delivery to her own email. For convenience, she had said. Convenience. That was the first red flag. I didn't confront her. Instead, I drove to Denver the following week and met Richard Langford in a quiet hotel suite on the 16th floor. Richard had been my attorney since David died. 62 years old, silver hair, eyes that missed nothing. He listened while I laid out the first dozen documents. "Eleanor," he said that day, voice low, "this isn't confusion. This is theft dressed up as family love." We set up the shadow account that same afternoon. A separate trust vehicle with its own routing numbers, triggered only if unauthorized movements exceeded $100,000. I funded it quietly with proceeds from a small investment portfolio I had never told Sophia about. $3.2 million, enough to fight with. Back in Aspen, life in the guest house grew colder by the week. They changed the Wi-Fi password first. Then they cancelled the grocery delivery service I had used for 6 years. Sophia left a note on my door. "We're trying to help you eat healthier, Mom. $700 should cover basics." Marcus was worse. At dinner one night in the main house, they still invited me, probably to keep up appearances. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of $400 Cabernet. "We're consolidating assets, Eleanor. Private equity is all about efficiency. Your trust is sitting there doing nothing while inflation eats it alive. Sophia and I can grow it, properly." I cut my salmon into small, precise pieces. "And what exactly have you grown so far, Marcus, besides the balance on your Amex?" He laughed. Sophia shot him a warning look, but he kept going. "Come on, we all know David left everything to you because he trusted you to pass it on, not to hoard it like some paranoid widow." I took a slow sip of water. Paranoid. Interesting word, especially from a man who moved $1.8 million out of the trust last quarter without trustee approval. The room went still. Sophia's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Mom, that's not—" Bank statements don't lie, I said calmly. Neither do time-stamped wire confirmations. I have both. Marcus recovered fast. You're imagining things. Early onset whatever. That's why we filed the petition. I set my glass down. Filing is one thing. Winning is another. I excused myself before dessert. As I walked back through the snow to the guest house, I could feel their eyes on my back through the glass walls. That night, my phone rang at 11:47 p.m. The caller ID showed Aspen Private Bank, after hours. I answered on the second ring. Mrs. Voss, the banker said, voice tight with urgency. I'm sorry to call so late. Your daughter and son-in-law just attempted to initiate a $4.2 million wire transfer from the main trust account. It was blocked immediately, per the standing instructions you placed 18 months ago. They're not happy. They demanded to speak to a supervisor. I looked out at the dark mountains. Thank you for the alert. Please log the attempt with full details. Timestamp, IP address, everything. Already done, he replied. And Mrs. Voss, they mentioned something about having you declared incompetent. Should we be concerned? A small, cold smile touched my lips. No, I said. They should. I hung up and opened the Kingsley folder again. I added the new entry under tonight's date. Attempted unauthorized withdrawal, $4,200,000. Blocked. Then I created a new subfolder. Labeled it Evidence, Phase 2. Inside, I began compiling the next layer. Forged signatures on 3 separate $250,000 gifts. Marcus's side deal with a failing hedge fund that used trust collateral without disclosure. Sophia's Instagram posts bragging about family wealth while tagging luxury brands they never paid for themselves. I worked until 3 a.m. My fingers never shook, my breathing stayed even, because every document I saved was another brick in the wall I was building around them. They thought they were backing me into a corner. They had no idea I had already rebuilt the entire house while they slept. The next morning, I heard raised voices from the main house. Marcus was on the phone with someone, tone sharp. Sophia paced in front of the windows, arms crossed tight. I made my bed with military corners, the way David taught me decades ago. Then I dressed in a simple grey wool dress and pearl earrings, nothing flashy, just enough to remind them who I used to be before I became Mom. At 9:15 a.m., there was a knock on the guesthouse door. Sophia stood there in her cashmere robe, hair still damp from the shower. Mom, we need to talk. Seriously, this isn't funny anymore. I stepped aside to let her in. She didn't sit. She paced the small living room instead. You're ruining everything, she hissed. Marcus's partners are asking questions. The bank called him at 6 a.m. What did you do? I poured myself a second cup of coffee. I protected what your father left me, what I built for you before you decided I was disposable. She stopped pacing. Her eyes narrowed. Disposable? We let you live here. We take care of you. $700 a month, I said softly. After I paid for your wedding, your house down payment, your cars, your vacations, your entire life. That's what you call taking care of me. She laughed, but it cracked at the edges. You're twisting things. You always do when you get like this. Like what, Sophia? Old, confused, bitter. I set the coffee down and looked at her for a long moment. The daughter I had carried, raised, sacrificed for. The one who now looked at me like an obstacle. You know what's funny? I said. I spent years believing love meant giving until it hurt. Turns out the real hurt started when I stopped. She opened her mouth to reply, but I raised my hand. No more tonight. You have your papers, I have mine. Let the attorneys sort it out. As she turned to leave, I added one last quiet line. Oh, and Sophia, she glanced back. Next time you try to move money out of my trust, make sure the routing number actually exists. The door slammed behind her. Not my door, hers. I waited until her footsteps faded, then opened my laptop again. New entry in the folder. Conversation with Sophia, 9:22 a.m. Admission of intent to control assets, witnessed by security camera footage, timestamped. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The snow had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days, glittering off the fresh powder. Somewhere in the main house, Marcus was probably on the phone with his lawyer, trying to salvage the morning. I picked up my phone and dialed Richard Langford. "Richard," I said when he answered. "They just attempted another withdrawal, and Sophia paid me a visit. It's time to move to phase 3. His reply was short and steady. "Understood. I'll have the full dossier ready by Friday. And Eleanor, are you holding up?" I looked at my reflection in the dark window. Silver hair neat, shoulders straight, eyes clear. "Better than ever," I said, because the truth was simple. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about power. I was about to teach them one about patience. And patience, I had learned after 68 quiet years, was the most dangerous weapon of all. I ended the call and stood there a moment longer, watching the light dance across the snow. Then I opened the safe, hidden behind the painting of David's favorite mountain view. Inside lay the thick folder labeled Kingsley, Complete File. I pulled it out and set it on the table. Page 2 was already waiting, and it was only going to get worse for them from here. The eviction notice arrived 2 days later by certified mail. I signed for it myself at the guest house door while the courier stood there in his red parka, breath fogging in the mountain air. The paper was crisp, official, typed on heavy stock. 30 days to vacate the guest suite. Reason given: property owner request due to tenants' declining mental capacity and safety concerns. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it on the kitchen counter next to my untouched coffee. Sophia had timed it perfectly. That same afternoon, her Instagram story went live. I saw it because the housekeeper, Maria, still forwarded me screenshots even after they told her not to speak to me. The video showed Sophia in the main living room, tears glistening under the recessed lighting, voice trembling just enough for the algorithm. "Guys, this is so hard to share," she said, "but my mum, she's not herself anymore. We're doing everything we can to keep her safe. If you have aging parents, you know how painful this is. Love you all." The comments poured in, heart emojis, prayers, offers of support from strangers who had no idea the woman in the guest house had paid for every designer bag in that perfectly framed shot. I closed the app without a sound. No tears, no shaking hands. I simply added the screenshot to the Kingsley folder under a new tab labeled Public Narrative Manufactured. Richard Langford called me that evening from Denver. His voice was steady on speakerphone while I stood at the window watching the last light fade behind the peaks. "They hired Dr. Harlan full-time now," he said. "Paid him another $15,000 retainer to prepare a formal evaluation. The report is scheduled for next week. They're pushing for an emergency hearing." I watched a single snowflake drift past the glass. "Let them. How many pages do we have on Harlan's previous cases?" 32, Richard answered. 4 settled out of court for coercion, 2 dismissed for bias. We'll have the affidavits by Monday." "Good," I said. "Send them to the trust's independent trustee as well, quietly." He paused. "Eleanor, you're still in that guest house. Utilities are still on, but I don't like how isolated you are." I smiled, small and private. Isolation has its advantages. They think I have nowhere to go. That makes them careless. The call ended. I made a simple dinner of grilled chicken and rice, measured to the gram because the grocery budget they allowed me now required precision. $700 a month meant no waste. I ate at the counter, fork clicking softly against the plate, while the main house glowed warm and golden across the courtyard. They invited me to dinner the following night. Not out of kindness, Marcus wanted an audience. I wore the same grey wool dress, pearls in place. The dining table was set for 3. Candlelight flickered off the $40,000 marble. Sophia barely looked at me. Marcus poured himself a generous glass of wine and launched straight in. "We had a good meeting with the attorneys today," he said, cutting into his steak. "Everything's moving forward. Once the conservatorship is approved, we can finally consolidate the trust. 28 million working for the family instead of sitting idle. Smart money moves, Eleanor. You should be proud." I took a small bite of asparagus. Proud of what, exactly? He gestured with his knife, casual. Of raising a daughter who understands wealth management. Sophia's been handling the social side beautifully. That Instagram post? Over 200,000 views already. People love a caring daughter story. Sophia's smile was tight. "It's not about views, Marcus. It's about doing the right thing." I set my fork down with a quiet click. 200,000 views. Interesting. And how many of those people know you tried to wire $4.2 million out of my trust last week? Marcus's knife paused mid-air. "We're not doing this tonight." "No," I said softly, "because I have the bank confirmation right here in my folder if you'd like to refresh your memory. Time-stamped. IP address from this very house." Sophia's cheeks flushed under the foundation. "Mom, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at her for a long second. The daughter who once cried in my arms when her first boyfriend left. Now she couldn't meet my eyes. "Embarrassing myself," I repeated, tasting the words. "That's new. Usually it's me paying the credit card bills that embarrass you." Marcus leaned forward, voice dropping to that boardroom tone he used when he thought he was winning. "Let's be adults. The psychiatrist's report will be clear. Mild cognitive impairment, it happens, no shame. We'll take care of everything. You can stay in a nice assisted living facility nearby. We'll visit every Sunday." I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Assisted living. How generous. And the $9.4 million ski chalet I bought Sophia for her 30th birthday. Will that be part of the consolidation too? Silence dropped like the snow outside. Marcus recovered first. "That chalet is in Sophia's name. Separate asset." "Was," I corrected, "until you used it as collateral for your side hedge fund. The one that's down 37% this quarter. Bank statements arrived yesterday. I have copies." Sophia's hand trembled as she reached for her wine. "You're making this up." I stood up slowly. Chair legs whispered against the floor. "I don't make things up, Sophia. I document them." "There's a difference." I walked to the door without another word. Behind me, Marcus muttered something sharp under his breath. I caught only the word ungrateful. The cold air in the courtyard bit at my cheeks as I crossed back to the guest house. Inside, I locked the door, drew the blinds, and sat in the dark for exactly 10 minutes. No crying, just breathing. In, out. Counting the insults like currency I would spend later. At 2:07 a.m., I rose from the bed. The safe behind David's mountain painting opened with a soft electronic beep. I reached inside and pulled out the single thick folder I had been waiting to touch. Kingsley, complete file. It weighed heavy in my hands. 147 pages now. Every wire, every lie, every forged signature. Every arrogant dinner remark recorded by the small, voice-activated device I kept in my cardigan pocket. I carried it to the table and opened it under the single desk lamp. Page 1. The rejected $4.2 million transfer. Page 2. Dr. Harlan's original $25,000 bribe email. Page 3. The mortgage papers on the chalet, signed by Marcus without disclosure. I turned each page slowly, the paper whispering like a promise. They thought they were evicting me from my dignity. They had no idea I was about to evict them from everything they thought they owned. I closed the folder and placed it back in the safe, but not before sliding one extra document on top. A single sheet Richard had couriered over that afternoon, a formal response to their petition, already signed by me, already filed with the court. The hearing was set for 3 weeks from now. I clicked the safe shut and stood in the darkness, listening to the faint hum of the heating system. Somewhere in the main house, they were probably still awake, congratulating themselves on how well the plan was working. I allowed myself one quiet exhale. Perfect. They had no idea the file in my safe wasn't just evidence anymore. It was the verdict, and the judge was me. The temperature inside the guest house dropped to 48 degrees overnight. I woke to the sound of the heater clicking off for the last time. Frozen pipes groaned behind the walls like old bones. Aspen winter had arrived hard, and Marcus had just cut the utilities tied to my name. I pulled on an extra sweater, made coffee on the single electric kettle that still worked, and sat at the small table. My breath fogged the air in short, steady puffs. No panic, just another entry for the file. They had cancelled the grocery delivery too. The last box arrived yesterday with exactly $700 worth of staples. Rice, beans, chicken breasts measured to the ounce. I portioned it out on the counter, labelling each meal with masking tape and dates. Precision kept me calm. At 9 sharp, I opened the Kingsley complete file again. Page 47 showed the first forged signature. $1.8 million in so-called gifts over 18 months. Sophia's handwriting on the transfer forms, close enough to mine to fool the junior bank clerk, but not close enough for the forensic analyst Richard had hired last month. I traced the numbers with one finger. $450,000 to Sophia's personal account, labelled Mom's gift for her birthday. My birthday had been in July. No card arrived, no call, just the withdrawal. Page 62 detailed Marcus's side deals. He had pulled $2.3 million from the trust to cover losses in a failing hedge fund. The fund's name was Kingsley Capital Partners. Cute. He used the ski chalet as collateral without disclosure. The mortgage papers carried his signature and a notary stamp he paid for under the table. I closed the folder and looked out at the snow. It piled against the guest house windows now, sealing me in like a quiet tomb. Perfect conditions for what came next. I left at dawn the following morning. Drove the back roads into Denver in the old Volvo I kept registered in my name alone. No one followed. The mountain passes were empty except for the occasional truck. I arrived at the hotel suite on the 16th floor exactly at 10. Richard Langford waited inside, laptop open, 3 thick binders on the table. "Eleanor," he said, standing to greet me. His handshake was firm. "They froze the utilities yesterday. I saw the work order. Marcus signed it himself." I sat across from him and opened the first binder. "I know. 48 degrees this morning. They think cold will break me faster than lawyers." Richard slid a fresh document across the glass table. "Counter-Strike map, Phase 3. We filed a full response to their petition on Monday. Included are affidavits from the bank manager, the forensic document expert, and the independent trustee. We also have the wire rejection logs, every single one." I flipped through the pages, line by line. $1.8 million in unreported gifts, $2.3 million in undisclosed loans. Marcus's mistress in Vale receiving $87,000 last quarter alone. The numbers didn't lie. They screamed. We freeze their access first, Richard continued. I've prepared the emergency motion to suspend any trustee changes until the hearing. The judge will see the pattern. Coercion, fraud, financial elder abuse. The statute is clear in Colorado. I tapped one column of figures. And the $9.4 million chalet. Already flagged. The lender received our notice this morning. Mortgage payments stop until ownership is verified. They'll default in 30 days. I allowed myself one slow nod. Good. They wanted control. Let them feel what it costs. We spent the next 2 hours mapping every move. Richard's voice stayed low and precise. Mine stayed steady. No emotion, just strategy. When we finished, he closed the laptop and looked at me across the table. You're holding up, he said. Not a question. I'm preparing, I replied. There's a difference. I drove back to Aspen as the sun dropped behind the peaks. The guest house was darker now, colder. I lit a single candle and reviewed the day's notes by its light. Another entry. Meeting with counsel. Counter motion drafted. Assets targeted. Chalet mortgage. Credit lines. Social media revenue streams. The knock came at 7:42 p.m. Sharp. Urgent. I opened the door, still wearing my coat. Sophia stood there in the snow, cashmere robe flapping open, hair wild from the wind. Her face was flushed, eyes wide with something between rage and panic. "What did you do?" she screamed. The sound cracked against the frozen air. I stepped aside without a word. She stormed inside, boots tracking snow across the tile. "The bank just called Marcus," she spat. Another transfer rejected. $1.1 million this time. They said the account is locked per trustee instructions. Your instructions. What the hell did you do, Mum? I closed the door behind her. The latch clicked softly. I protected what belongs to me, I said. She laughed, high and brittle. Protected? You're freezing yourself to death in this glorified shed while we try to help you. The utilities, the groceries, everything. It's for your own good. And now you're sabotaging the trust, our future. I walked to the counter and poured myself a glass of water. My hand did not shake. Your future, I corrected. The one built on $1.8 million in forged gifts and $2.3 million in hidden losses. I have the statements, Sophia. Every wire, every signature that isn't mine. She stopped pacing. The colour drained from her cheeks under the candlelight. You're lying, she whispered. You're confused. Dr. Harlan said Dr. Harlan received $40,000 total. I cut in. I have the emails, the timestamps, the bank records. Would you like to see page 68? Sophia's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in years, she looked small inside that expensive robe. Marcus is calling the lawyers right now, she said, voice cracking. We'll fix this. You can't just... I already did, I replied. My tone stayed even. Ice over steel. The motion is filed. The hearing is locked. And tomorrow morning the chalet lender will receive their notice too. Default in 30 days. Enjoy explaining that to your followers. She took one step toward me, then stopped. The candle flame flickered between us. You're ruining us, she hissed. I set the water glass down with a quiet click. No, Sophia. You did that the day you decided $700 a month was enough for the woman who gave you everything. She stared at me for 3 long seconds. Then she turned and yanked the door open. Snow rushed in on a cold gust. This isn't over, she said over her shoulder. I watched her disappear into the main house lights across the courtyard. The door shut. Silence returned, deeper now. I walked to the safe, opened it, and added today's new document. The emergency motion confirmation from Richard. Page 148. Then I sat back down at the table, candles still burning low. They had just felt the first real crack in their perfect world, and the next one would be louder. Much louder. The official filing arrived by courier at 8:17 a.m. 3 days later. I signed the receipt with the same steady hand I used for everything now. The document was thicker than before. Petition for conservatorship and guardianship. Mental incompetence. Court date set for February 12th. Marcus had moved fast once the utilities froze. I carried the papers inside the guest house and laid them flat on the kitchen counter. The heater still refused to work. I kept my coat on and made tea instead, the cheap bag kind that came with the $700 budget. Steam rose in slow curls while snow fell heavy outside the window, muting every sound. My phone buzzed at 9:05. Marcus. I let it ring twice before answering. Eleanor, he said, voice clipped and professional, the tone he used on investor calls. The papers are filed. Court date is locked. Once the judge sees Dr. Harlan's report, you'll be declared a ward of the state. Temporary at first, then permanent. It's for your safety. I took a slow sip of tea. The liquid burned just enough to remind me I was still here. A ward of the state, I repeated. My voice stayed flat. How generous of you to plan my future, Marcus. He didn't laugh this time. Sign the voluntary agreement today and we drop everything. Full access to the trust. Sophia and I handle the investments. You get the assisted living suite with mountain view. No more freezing in that guest house. I set the cup down. The click echoed in the small room. I'll see you in court, I said. The line went dead. I added the call log to the folder. Timestamp. Exact words. Another brick. That afternoon I drove into Denver again. The roads were slick, but I took them slow. Richard Langford waited in the same 16th floor suite. This time the independent trustee from the bank joined us. Margaret Klein, 61, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had reviewed every page I sent. Mrs. Voss, she said, shaking my hand. The board reviewed the evidence last night. We're withdrawing support for the Kingsley petition. The pattern is clear. Fraudulent transfers. Undisclosed conflicts. We stand with the original trustee language. I nodded once. No smile. Just the quiet satisfaction of numbers aligning. Richard opened a fresh binder on the table. Today's update. They officially filed at 7:45 a.m. We have the counter affidavits ready. Forensic handwriting expert confirms 3 signatures were forged. Bank logs show Marcus accessed the trust portal from his home IP on 14 separate occasions. Margaret slid a single sheet across to me. And the independent audit. Total unauthorized movement, $4.7 million over 26 months. We've frozen every linked account pending the hearing. I scanned the bottom line. $4,700,000. Exact. No rounding. I pictured Sophia's face when the next credit card declined. We spent 90 minutes, line by line. Richard read the figures aloud in his measured baritone. I listened, sipping water from a hotel glass, calculating each one in silence. $920,000 to Sophia's secret LLC last March. $1.4 million to Marcus's hedge fund in June. $87,000 wired to an account in Vail under the name L. Moreau. Mistress. Confirmed. Every number felt like a cold weight settling exactly where it belonged. Margaret closed her notebook at the end. You're not fighting alone anymore, Eleanor. The trustee board is unanimous. We will testify if needed. I stood. The meeting had taken exactly the time I planned. No wasted minutes. Thank you, I said. Simple. Final. The drive back to Aspen stretched longer in the gathering dark. Snow packed the shoulders of the road. I kept the radio off. My mind moved through the next steps like chess pieces on a board I had memorized years ago. They had filed. Court date set. Marcus had threatened the Ward of the State card. Perfect. Let them believe the trap was closing around me. I parked the Volvo and crossed the courtyard to the guest house. Lights blazed in the main house. Sophia's silhouette moved behind the glass, phone to her ear, pacing. I didn't look long. Inside my small space, I lit the candle again and opened the Kingsley complete file. It was heavier now. 209 pages. I reviewed the bank statements one final time before the hearing, line by line, date by date. I wrote the totals in a separate ledger with a black pen. Cold ink, cold math. $28 million original trust value. $4.7 million diverted. $23.3 million still intact. Interest earned in shadow account. $412,000. Enough to bury them twice over. The candle burned low. I didn't move to replace it. The flickering light danced across the numbers like tiny warnings. At 10:47 p.m., my phone lit up again. Richard. I answered immediately. "Eleanor," he said. His voice carried a new edge. "I just received the updated discovery packet from their side. They added more to the chalet file. I'm sending a courier tonight. You need to see this." I waited in the dark until the knock came at 11:22. The young man in the parka handed me a thick binder sealed with tape. No words, just a nod. I carried it to the table and opened it under the dying candle. Richard's note was clipped to the front page. Short, precise. "We're ready. But you need to see what they did with the Aspen ski chalet first." I turned the page. The numbers hit like the mountain air. $9.4 million property. Mortgaged for $6.8 million in secret. Proceeds wired to an account I had never seen. El Moreau again. And one more line at the bottom, highlighted in red. Default notice issued yesterday. Foreclosure proceedings begin in 21 days. I closed the binder slowly. Snow tapped against the window like quiet applause. They had sold the future I bought for my daughter to fund a mistress and failing deals, while I froze in the guest house they had built on lies. I sat back in the chair. The candle finally went out. In the sudden dark, I allowed myself one slow breath. Then I reached for the phone and dialed Richard back. "Tell the trustee board we add the chalet file to the evidence," I said. "All of it." His reply was short. "Done." I ended the call and sat in the perfect silence. The hearing was 2 weeks away, and now I had the final nail. The chalet file sat open on the guesthouse table like a wound that refused to close. I read every line again under the single desk lamp, the paper edges worn from handling. $9.4 million property. The one I bought outright for Sophia's 30th birthday. Title in her name only. Deed signed in my presence with champagne and promises. Now mortgaged for $6.8 million. Proceeds wired to an account labelled Vale Holdings LLC. Owner listed as L. Moreau, Marcus's mistress. The transfers were dated 6 weeks after I moved into the guest house. I closed my eyes for exactly 60 seconds. No sound, no movement. 1 minute of silent tears that slid down my cheeks and dropped onto the folder, blurring a single line of ink. Then I opened my eyes, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and stood up straight. Enough. The candle had burned out hours ago. I lit a new one. The flame steadied. So did I. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard Langford. He answered on the first ring, even though it was past midnight. "Eleanor," he said, voice alert, "you saw the chalet packet." "Every page," I replied. My tone stayed even. "Reactivate the Centurion card under the shadow account. Trigger the offshore alerts on the Kingsley Capital Partners holdings. And prepare the default notice for the lender. I want it hand-delivered tomorrow."
Richard didn't hesitate. Done. The trustee board already signed off. We'll have the full emergency motion ready for the judge by morning. They're going to feel this one. I ended the call and opened the safe. Inside lay the final preparation folder.
I added the chalet documents as pages 210 through 237. Every wire, every signature, every lie now time-stamped and notarized. They had taken the house I gave my daughter and turned it into cash for another woman while I lived on rice and beans in 48-degree cold. Cold determination settled over me like fresh snow. No anger, just clarity. I spent the next 2 hours at the table mapping the final moves. Centurion card reactivation would restore my access to every account they thought they controlled. Offshore alerts would flag any attempt to move funds out of the country. The default notice on the chalet would hit their credit lines like a silent avalanche. At 3:12 a.m. I stood, stretched once, and walked to the window. The main house glowed across the courtyard, warm and untouched. Sophia's silhouette passed behind the glass, phone in hand. Marcus's car sat in the driveway, engine still ticking from a late return. I didn't watch long. I returned to the table and reviewed the numbers one last time. $6.8 million mortgage. $4.7 million already diverted. Total exposure, $11.5 million. They had spent my silence like it was free. Tomorrow the bill arrived. I slept 4 hours, woke at first light. The guest house was still freezing, but my mind felt sharper than the mountain air. I dressed in the grey wool dress again, pearls in place, hair pinned back. The uniform of the woman they underestimated. The grocery delivery never came. Another cut. I ate the last measured portion of rice and chicken, chewing slowly, tasting nothing but the plan. At 10:45 a.m. the knock sounded on the guesthouse door, sharp, official. I opened it to find a process server in a dark coat, clipboard in hand. He looked past me toward the main house. "Papers for Kingsley residents," he said. "Marcus and Sophia Kingsley." I took the thick envelope without surprise. "They're in the main house. I'll walk you over." He followed me across the snow-covered courtyard. My boots left clean prints in the fresh powder. His followed. The main house door opened before we reached it. Sophia stepped out, robe wrapped tight, eyes narrowing when she saw me. "What's this?" she demanded. The server handed her the envelope. "Service of process. Court documents." She tore it open right there on the steps. Her face went white as the snow. Marcus appeared behind her, phone still to his ear. He ended the call mid-sentence and snatched the papers. His eyes scanned the top page, then widened. "This isn't for her," he said, voice rising for the first time. This is an emergency motion to freeze all assets. Restraining order. Default notice on the chalet. What the hell?" The process server checked his clipboard. "Correct, sir. Served on Marcus Kingsley and Sophia Voss Kingsley, not the respondent." Sophia's hands shook as she flipped to the second page. "Mom, what did you do?" I stood 3 steps back, hands folded in front of me. The wind tugged at my coat, but I didn't move. "I did nothing you didn't teach me," I said quietly. "You wanted control of the trust. You wanted me declared incompetent. You wanted the chalet money for your mistress and your failing deals." Marcus looked up from the papers, face drained of colour. "This is a bluff. The hearing is in 6 days. We'll crush this." I allowed the smallest pause. "No," I said. "You won't." The process server cleared his throat. "Sign here, please. Acknowledgement of service." Marcus signed with a furious slash. Sophia stared at me like she had never seen me before. I turned and walked back across the courtyard without another word. Their voices rose behind me, sharp and panicked, but the snow muffled everything except the steady crunch of my boots. Inside the guest house, I locked the door, sat at the table, and opened the Kingsley complete file one final time. The process server's delivery confirmation would be scanned and added within the hour. Page 238. They had just received the first official warning that the trap was not around me. It had always been around them, and in 6 days the judge would see every page. I closed the folder and looked out at the mountains. The storm outside was building. Inside me, everything was perfectly still. The courtroom in Denver smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Snow from the night before still clung to the tall windows, muting the morning light into a cold grey. I sat in the back row, 3 seats from the aisle, hands folded in my lap. Same grey wool dress, same pearls. No notes, no expression. Just the thick folder on the seat beside me and the steady tick of the wall clock above the judge's bench. Marcus and Sophia arrived at 9:05 exactly. They swept in like they owned the room. Marcus in a fresh Tom Ford suit, navy with faint pinstripes. Sophia in cream cashmere and pearls that matched mine, her hand tucked through his arm as if this were a charity gala. Their attorney followed close behind, a man named Harlan Price, with a $1,200 haircut and a briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly allowance. They took the plaintiff's table without a glance in my direction. The bailiff called the case. In the matter of the conservatorship of Eleanor Voss. Judge Harlan Bennett entered from the side door. 63, steel grey hair, eyes that had seen every trick in family court. He settled into the bench and nodded once. Counsel, proceed. Price stood first. His voice rolled out smooth and practiced. Your Honour, we present clear and compelling evidence that Mrs. Eleanor Voss suffers from mild cognitive impairment, memory lapses, poor financial judgment. Her daughter and son-in-law have acted only out of love and concern. We ask the court to appoint them as guardians and conservators of the Voss Family Trust, valued at $28 million, to protect the assets for the family's future. He slid a thick binder across the bench. Dr. Harlan's report, the one they paid for. Pages of carefully worded observations. Patient exhibited confusion regarding recent transactions. Expressed paranoia about family motives. Recommended immediate conservatorship. Marcus leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other. Sophia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of a devoted daughter. They had rehearsed this. The judge scanned the first few pages. His face stayed neutral. Mrs. Voss, do you have counsel present? Richard Langford stood from the respondent table. Yes, Your Honour. Richard Langford representing Mrs. Eleanor Voss. We are ready to respond. I remained in the back row. No need to move yet. Let them feel the weight of the empty seat at the defence table. Price smiled, confident. We also have affidavits from household staff and financial records showing Mrs. Voss's inability to manage daily affairs. The guesthouse utilities were disconnected only after repeated safety concerns. The monthly allowance of $700 was adjusted for her benefit. The judge turned a page. Mr. Price, continue. Richard waited until the room settled. Then he stood again, calm as still water. Your Honour, before we go further, we would like to present the respondent's evidence packet. One copy for the court, one for opposing counsel. He handed up a binder twice as thick as Price's. The judge opened it. I watched his eyes move across the first page. Richard's voice stayed low, precise. Page 1. Bank statement dated 18 months ago. Trustee instructions signed by Mrs. Voss blocking any transfer over $100,000 without her direct approval. Page 2. Forensic handwriting analysis confirming 3 forged signatures on trust withdrawal forms totaling $1.8 million. The forger's identity matches Sophia Voss Kingsley. Sophia's head snapped up. Marcus uncrossed his legs. Richard continued without pause. Page 14. Wire transfer logs showing Marcus Kingsley accessed the trust portal from his home IP address on 14 occasions. Unauthorized movements total $4.7 million. Page 37. Mortgage documents on the Aspen ski chalet, $9.4 million property gifted to Sophia Voss Kingsley, secretly leveraged for $6.8 million. Proceeds routed to Vale Holdings LLC, owned by one L. Moreau. Price shot to his feet. Objection. This is character assassination, not evidence. The judge raised one hand. Overruled. Mr. Langford, proceed. Richard turned a page in his own copy. Page 52. Affidavit from Aspen Private Bank manager confirming the $4.2 million transfer attempt on December 12th. Blocked per standing instructions. IP trace leads directly to the Kingsley residence. Marcus's jaw tightened. Sophia's tissue crumpled in her fist. I sat perfectly still. The clock ticked louder now. Richard's next words cut sharper. And finally, Your Honor, page 79. The Independent Trustees Audit. The Board has withdrawn all support for the petitioner's motion. They classify the actions as financial elder abuse under Colorado Statute 18.6.5103. Judge Bennett leaned forward. His expression had shifted. No longer neutral, now sharp, focused. Mr. Kingsley, he said, voice level, can you explain this $2.7 million wire to an account in your mistress's name? The courtroom went silent. Marcus's face drained of colour. The tan from his last Vale weekend disappeared in seconds. His mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. Sophia turned to him, eyes wide. Marcus? Price tried to jump in. Your Honour, this is irrelevant to the conservatorship petition. The judge cut him off with a single look. It is highly relevant when the petitioners are asking for control of $28 million. Mr. Kingsley, I'm waiting. Marcus gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went white. That was a business loan. Kingsley Capital Partners. Legitimate investment. Richard spoke again, calm as ever. The account belongs to L. Moreau, age 34, address in Vale. Bank records show 6 additional wires totaling $870,000 in the last 14 months, all labeled personal, none reported to the trust. The judge flipped another page. And the chalet mortgage default notice? Issued yesterday. Foreclosure in 21 days. You leveraged a gifted asset without disclosure. Sophia's shoulders started to shake. Not fake tears this time. Real ones. I remained in the back row. No smile, no movement. Just the quiet weight of every page we had built. Judge Bennett closed the binder. The sound echoed like a gavel. Counsel will approach the bench, he said. Richard and Price walked forward. The judge spoke in low tones. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught the key ones. Recess for 1 hour. I want full explanations on these wires. And Mr. Kingsley, bring your personal financials. Now. Marcus stayed seated as the courtroom emptied. His face stayed pale. Sophia whispered something sharp in his ear. He didn't answer. I stood slowly and walked toward the exit. My steps were measured. The pearls at my throat caught the grey light for just a second. They had arrived confident. They would leave broken. But the real blow was still coming. Because when court resumed in 1 hour, Richard would hand the judge the final page, the one that listed the restraining order and the immediate asset freeze on every account tied to their names. I stepped into the hallway and waited by the tall window. Snow fell again outside, soft and relentless. Marcus's face had drained of colour once. It would drain completely when the judge asked the next question. The courtroom reconvened at 10:47 a.m. Snow tapped against the tall windows like impatient fingers. I stayed in the back row, folder on my lap, while Marcus and Sophia returned to their table. Their attorney, Price, looked smaller now. His $1,200 haircut no longer seemed impressive under the harsh fluorescent lights. Judge Bennett did not waste time. He opened the thick binder Richard had given him and spoke without looking up. "Mr. Kingsley, the court has reviewed the additional evidence. The $2.7 million wire to El Moreau is not a business loan. It is personal. The chalet mortgage default is confirmed. The forged signatures total $1.8 million. This is not mild cognitive impairment on the part of Mrs. Voss. This is financial elder abuse." Marcus gripped the table edge again. His knuckles had gone white hours ago. They stayed that way. Sophia leaned toward Price, whispering fast. Her voice carried just enough for the front rows to hear. "Do something. Fix this." The judge continued, voice level and final. "The petition for conservatorship is denied. The Voss Family Trust remains under the sole control of Eleanor Voss. All unauthorized transfers are reversed immediately. The $4.7 million diverted will be returned to the trust within 14 days, with interest at the statutory rate of 8%. Richard stood. "Your Honour, we also request an immediate eviction notice for the Kingsley residence. The main house was purchased with trust funds. Title remains in the trust." The judge nodded once. "Granted. Eviction effective in 30 days. Mr. Kingsley and Ms. Voss Kingsley will vacate the property." Marcus made a sound low in his throat. Not a word, just air escaping. Sophia's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, then froze. Her face went pale under the courtroom lights. "My accounts," she whispered. "They're frozen." Richard spoke again, calm as ever. "Your Honour, we have notified the social media platforms. Sophia Voss Kingsley's influencer revenue streams, valued at $40,000 per month, were generated using trust-funded content and assets. Those accounts are now frozen pending fraud review." The judge turned a page. Noted. "Mr. Kingsley, your private equity partners have been sent the full dossier by secure courier this morning. Kingsley Capital Partners is under immediate internal investigation." Marcus's head snapped up. "You can't do that." "I didn't," I said from the back row. My voice carried across the silent courtroom, low and perfectly steady. "The trustee board did, after they reviewed the same numbers I showed them." Every head turned. Sophia's eyes met mine for the first time since the hearing began. Real fear lived there now. Not the fake Instagram kind. The judge closed the binder with a soft thud. "Court is adjourned. Mrs. Voss retains full authority. The petitioners will receive formal orders by close of business today." Marcus and Sophia stood. Their legs moved like they had forgotten how. Price gathered papers with shaking hands. No one spoke as they walked down the aisle toward the exit. I rose slowly and followed at a measured distance. The hallway outside smelled of wet wool and defeat. Snowlight filtered through the high windows, turning the marble floor into a cold mirror. They stopped near the elevators. Sophia's phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen and let out a small, broken sound. "The Amex declined. In open court. The notification just came through." Marcus pulled out his own wallet. He stared at the Centurion card they had bragged about for years. Mine too. Both cards. "Frozen." Sophia turned toward me. Tears streaked her makeup now, real ones. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We'll pay everything back. Just talk to us." I stopped 3 feet away. The folder stayed under my arm. No need to open it anymore. Every page had already spoken. Marcus stepped forward. His Tom Ford suit suddenly looked too big on him. "Eleanor, listen, this is a misunderstanding. The mistress thing, it was nothing. Business stress. We were trying to grow the trust for the family. For you." I looked at him for a long second. The man who had slid the mental incompetence petition across the marble table like it was a dinner check. The man who had cut my heat in winter. "You wanted control," I said quietly. "Now you have nothing." Sophia's shoulders crumpled. "We'll be on this street in 30 days. The chalet is gone.
Our accounts are empty. What are we supposed to do?" I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out the final envelope. Plain black, no label. The same kind I had slid across the dining table weeks ago. I handed it to Marcus. He took it with fingers that trembled. Inside were 2 documents: the formal restraining order barring them from any contact with me or the trust accounts, and the asset freeze confirmation on every joint holding. "Read it later," I said. "Or don't. It changes nothing." Sophia reached for my arm. I stepped back once, not angry, just final. "You taught me the value of silence," I told them. I finally listened. I turned and walked toward the tall glass doors at the end of the hallway. My boots clicked softly on the marble. Behind me, their voices rose in desperate whispers, but the snow outside swallowed the sound before it could reach me. I pushed the door open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Snow fell steadily across the Denver streets, covering everything in fresh white. I stepped outside without looking back. The envelope in Marcus's hand would be the last thing they received from me. Inside it, one more line at the bottom of the restraining order, typed in clear black ink. "Any attempt to approach the Aspen property will result in immediate police involvement." I pulled my coat tighter and walked into the snow. The flakes landed on my pearls and melted instantly, like small, quiet victories. They had arrived at court certain they would leave with $28 million. They would leave with 30 days to pack and 2 frozen credit cards. And I would leave with the only thing that had ever mattered: control. I kept walking. The mountain road back to Aspen waited ahead. The guest house was still cold, but not for long. The main house would be mine again soon. Behind me, the courthouse doors stayed shut. They were still standing in that hallway, staring at the black envelope, wondering how everything had reversed so completely, wondering what page they had missed. I didn't wonder. I already knew. 6 months later, the Aspen mansion felt like it had never been touched by their voices. The glass walls still framed the same snow-capped peaks, but the air inside carried only the faint scent of cedar logs and fresh coffee. I sat in the main living room now, the one with the $40,000 marble table that once hosted their ambush. No more guest house, no more $700 budget. The trust was mine again, every dollar accounted for and locked behind new safeguards that even the sharpest private equity mind could not crack. I wore the same grey wool dress, pearls still in place. Some habits refused to change. The fireplace crackled low and steady, throwing warm light across the floor. On the side table rested my Centurion card, black and heavy, reactivated the day after the hearing. I had not used it once for anything flashy. I did not need to. Its presence was enough. Outside, the mountains stood silent. Inside, so did I. The court orders had arrived exactly as Richard promised. Full reversal of every unauthorized transfer. The $4.7 million came back with interest, wired quietly into the trust on the 14th day. The chalet foreclosure notice was paid off in full by the lender once they received the dossier. Title reverted to the trust. Marcus and Sophia received their 30-day eviction notice the same afternoon the judge signed the final order. They packed in silence. No screaming, no dramatic exit. Just 2 moving trucks rolling down the driveway while snow fell, covering their tire tracks before they reached the main road. I never watched them leave. I was in Denver that day, signing the last stack of documents with Richard. When I returned, the house was empty except for Maria, the housekeeper, who had stayed loyal. She met me at the door with a simple nod. "It's yours again, Mrs. Voss." I nodded back. That was all.
Sophia and Marcus now lived in a one-bedroom rental in Denver. I knew because the trustee board received the monthly reports. $2,800 a month. No mountain view, no staff, no social circle. Their Instagram accounts stayed frozen. The tearful, caring daughter posts were removed for policy violations. Marcus's private equity partners dissolved the side fund within weeks. The mistress in Vale moved on when the wires stopped. Last I heard, they were both working entry-level consulting gigs, the kind that paid just enough to cover rent and the occasional grocery run. No more $400 Cabernet. No more bragging at dinner tables. I never called. I never texted. The restraining order made sure of that. Any attempt to reach me triggered an automatic alert to Richard and the local sheriff. They tried once, in the 3rd month. A single letter slid under the gate. I returned it unopened with a courier note. Return to sender, all contact prohibited. The envelope came back the next day. No reply. I picked up the book on the arm of my chair, an old leather-bound volume of mountain history. The pages turned easily under my fingers. No trembling. No second thoughts. The fire popped once, sending a spark dancing up the chimney. I set the book down and looked at the Centurion card again. It caught the firelight and held it. A quiet reminder that money had never been the point. They thought it was. They thought $28 million could buy them freedom from consequences. They thought my silence meant weakness. They never understood that silence was the weapon I had sharpened for 3 quiet years. I stood and walked to the tall windows. Snow fell softly outside, the same way it had the night they slid the mental incompetence papers across the marble table. The difference now was simple. I was no longer in the guest house watching from the cold. I was here, warm, in the house my husband built and I protected. The trust was bulletproof. New clauses, new trustees, new audit requirements. No one would ever touch it again without my direct, witnessed approval. A small private smile touched my lips. Not triumph, just peace. I thought of the woman I had been 6 months ago, sitting at that same marble table with a pen in my hand and a black envelope ready. I remembered the exact moment I slid it across instead of signing, the way Marcus's face changed, the way Sophia's laugh cracked, that single second when their perfect plan met the first real wall. They never saw it coming, not the bank blocks, not the forged signature affidavits, not the chalet default, not the moment the judge asked Marcus about the mistress wire and watched his entire world shrink to the size of a courtroom table. I did, because I had spent 3 years preparing while they spent 3 years assuming. I turned from the window and walked back to the chair. The fire had settled into a steady glow. I sat down, picked up the book again, and opened it to where I left off. The Centurion card stayed on the table, a silent witness. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, everything was exactly as it should be. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most, if you have ever watched them sharpen knives while smiling at family dinners, then you already know the only real power worth holding is the kind no one sees until it is too late. Preparation, silence, patience. Those are the things money cannot buy and courts cannot reverse. I turned the page. The fire burned on. And for the first time in decades, I breathed without waiting for the next betrayal.